The Go 3S is the successor to the Go 3. Okay, Captain Obvious, but is it worth the switch? Well, it's an upgrade in some ways and a downgrade in others. Let me explain. I've loved the Go right from the very first version. It's one of the best action cameras for everyday POV shots. But it took a few iterations for the Go to get good with regard to video quality. Now with the Go 3S we have 4K footage in a tiny, lightweight magnetic camera. The action pod is the same as before, and the camera itself looks almost identical to the Go 3, but for a slightly larger lens and a different texture on the sides. The video footage looks great. It gets the right exposure, it handles direct sun very well, the colours look good including skin tones, and the auto white balance behaves very well. No overly red skin tones on this. The increase to 4K resolution is welcome and noticeable, but side by side with the Go 3 when matched for contrast and sharpness, the difference is not as big as you might think. To my eyes it's quite subtle. Stabilization works very well, just as you would expect. The maximum video quality is 4K 30, there's no 60 FPS here. If you drop down to 2.7K you can get 50 FPS but still no 60. I believe the new sensor is rectangular rather than square like before, and that rectangular sensor is how they're able to get 4K. The downside is that the camera has to be mounted horizontally instead of vertically. If you mount it vertically, that footage will be portrait, so you lose the ability to change from vertical to horizontal and vice versa later. Another thing you lose when switching to the 3S is field of view. The new camera isn't as wide as before, now having a 16mm equivalent lens, compared to the Go 3's 11mm. And another thing that's changed is the aperture. The Go 3S has an f2.8 aperture, which lets less light in than the Go 3's f2.2. Speaking of low light, like the Go 3 and even the Go 2, the Go 3S punches above its weight in low light, never ceasing to surprise me with how well it copes in dark situations, given how small the lens and sensor are. Even with the new slower lens, it does a decent job when the sun goes down. There's a jitter blur reduction mode, which increases the shutter speed, and while it makes things look a bit darker, it reduces that smearing that digital stabilization causes, and in some cases it makes the difference between usable and unusable footage. I wanted to simulate using the camera exactly how I would actually use it in real life, so I stuck it to a t-shirt on a warm summer day, and at 4K 30 I got 21 minutes before it overheated. Indoors I got about 27 minutes before overheating, and when in the action pod it's more like an hour and a half. There is no slow motion in 4K. You can get 100 FPS if you drop down to 2.7K, and the quality is really good, but the stabilization is either very weak or not there at all, so handheld shots are quite shaky. If you're willing to spend extra time processing the slow-mo files in Insta360 software, you can get really stable slow motion. Just make sure to shoot a bit wider because there's quite a heavy crop. It's a pity we still can't play back the slow motion recordings on the camera. You'll have to download them before you can see what you just recorded. They've brought back the interval video mode, where you wear the camera on your shirt all day and it takes little clips at set intervals and then it shows you what your day was like. You need to use the app to get the most out of it, but I just dragged all the clips into a timeline and made them into one video. I was excited about this mode, but when I played back my day, it didn't turn out as well as I'd hoped. I think if the field of view was a lot wider, it would have been better, but it's kinda narrow, and so a lot of the lower part of the frame was cut off in some of the clips. I think that feature would really shine with a wider lens. The Go line of cameras have been among my most used cameras for years now. The small size and convenience of being able to quickly attach them to my shirt or my hat or my forehead means I capture a lot more footage than I would normally with an ordinary action camera. They're great for hands-free POV shots. I think the video quality is more than good enough now. In terms of reliability, it's been perfectly stable for me, but the lack of a vibration motor in the camera itself leaves me with no choice but to turn on the beeps, and they're quite loud. When I'm in a bookshop or trying to get close to a wild animal, those loud beeps are less than desirable. I tried turning them off, but then I never knew if I was recording or not, and more than half of my shots were missed. As for whether or not I think it's worth upgrading from the Go 3, I think that depends on what's more important to you. The only real reason as I see it is the 4K, but the resolution upgrade brings only a slight improvement to the footage, and with that comes several sacrifices, like the slower aperture, narrower field of view, and having to mount it horizontally. I use this almost exclusively for POV shots, and for me, wider is better. So for my use, the Go 3 works better. But if you value the higher resolution more, and some people will, the Go 3S is the one to get. If you already have the 3, I don't really think it's worth switching. Sit tight and wait for the Go 4. If you find this useful or interesting, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.